Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is the first in our webinar series. It's a three-part series on ending rental arrears to stop evictions. So thank you. We're so thrilled you're here. Thanks for having us. Before we get started today, I'm Sarah Gallagher. I'm the Senior Project Director for our Erase program here at the Coalition. So thank you again. I'd like to go over a few logistics so we have a sense of how today will run. Go to the next. So just to let everyone know, our session today is being recorded. The recording, the notes and slides will all be posted and available on our website later this week, and we will send them out at the end of the series in 3 weeks. Everyone here is muted in sort of participant mode, so that means you're muted and you cannot unmute yourselves. But we don't want that to take away from participation. We really do want this to be as interactive as possible. So please share thoughts, experiences, insights in the chat, and please be sure to post any questions for our speakers in the Q&A, and we'll be monitoring those as we go and be able to ask our presenters and speakers those questions throughout the webinar today. So please make sure to do that. Next slide, great. So today's webinar coincides with the July 28th White House call to action on rental assistance. This is a great call to action where the federal government is creating an all-out push to get the word out on emergency rental assistance, particularly with the end of the CDC moratorium coming upon us this weekend. As part of that call to action, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is launching a new lookup tool that allows renters and landlords to find information on rental assistance in your area. So we're really asking as part of today to have everyone to help spread the message and get the word out on ERA. So asking to please email, use social media, and let folks know that ERA is available and there to help. You'll see the hashtag there, hashtag rent to help. In addition to the CFPB, I also want to mention that the NLHC resources are still available and that dashboard is still up and working if you also want to use that resource to search for programs or to look at the different components the programs have. So with the end of the moratorium upon us this Saturday, this series and the call to action really could not be more timely. According to Pulse data, the share of renter households currently not caught up is around 15.5%, and that represents about 6.5 million renter households who are at risk of eviction. It's our hope really over the next 3 weeks that we can provide you with information, strategies, tools to help you implement or advocate for changes that will ensure that the programs meet those most in need and most at risk of housing loss, and that people have the support that they need. Today, we have a really robust agenda, and we're going to hear from 2 national speakers on effective strategies to equitable outreach so that you can really put strategies into practice right away. I'm going to give an overview of our call to action and our checklist that aligns with today's agenda on creating visible programs. After that, our Poppe will talk about an overview of the framework for equitable ERA programs and different strategies for advancing equity and outreach through ERA. We're going to hear from Samantha Batko, a senior research associate at Urban Institute, on how to use the urban database of at-risk neighborhoods to target ERA and to really look at how neighborhoods most at risk. And then we'll move into a panel discussion that is facilitated by Peggy Bailey, senior advisor of rental assistance at HUD, to learn about putting strategies into action and to learn what some local communities are doing related to equitable outreach and marketing. The next slide. So to help us prepare for the end of the moratorium, we at NLHC pulled together Treasury guidance, emerging research, and to develop a framework to assist state partners, local jurisdictions, and ERA program administrators to do things. We want to ensure that the money gets out the door quickly to those most in need, but also to help develop infrastructure for scale and sustainability of emergency rental assistance for the long term. The framework that draws on what we've been learning really focuses on 3 key areas that we feel will have the greatest impact, and that we're asking that folks over the next few weeks really hone in on these 3 areas to have the most impact. The first area is visible. Emergency rental assistance providers should be conducting equitable and robust marketing and outreach efforts to ensure that all landlords, low-income renters, and those already experiencing homelessness know about ERA programs and they know how to access them swiftly. Programs should be accessible. Programs will support equitable access to and disbursement of financial support, and they should be applications should be streamlined, low barrier, and available in multiple formats. Lastly, we are really hoping that programs are preventive. They should ensure holistic, responsive interventions at all intersection points, such as state and local courts, to prevent evictions, housing displacement, and homelessness. Also, programs should be integrating tenant protections into a well-rounded eviction and prevention and diversion strategies. To support states and localities in forwarding this framework, we've developed a series of what we're calling checklists that are designed to help you make quick assessment of emergency rental assistance programs, help to lay out attributes for model programs, and then offer strategies for program implementation, partnership development, and course correction if need be. So as I mentioned, today we're focused on visible, ensuring equitable outreach and marketing to target rental assistance. And I'll take a brief minute to go over what that checklist will include. You'll be able to find the checklists on our websites later this week, where you'll be able to download them and actually use them in a checklist form to assess your programs. So households most in need and with multiple barriers must be able to access emergency rental assistance when they most need it. But this can sometimes be challenging. Sometimes geographic isolation causes a barrier, language differences, mistrust of government, stigma, or lack of access to technology can all create barriers. In the last few months, many programs have adopted really creative strategies to overcome these barriers. For example, some are working with trusted community partners to help with outreach. They've consulted with residents about program implementation and course correction, and they're using data to identify areas most impacted by COVID and to target those areas for emergency rental assistance. The ERASE checklist for visible programs helps guide communities through some of the important decisions about outreach and marketing strategies central to realizing racial justice, ensuring assistance reaches households experiencing the worst impacts of the pandemic, and ensures eviction prevention efforts are reaching those who are at greatest risk of homelessness. So the checklist highlights three attributes for program models that can help ensure visibility of emergency rental assistance. The first area is that the implementation of rental assistance should ensure that outreach efforts and resources are effectively reaching neighborhoods and communities, including BIPOC communities with the greatest risk and needs for assistance. Some of the strategies that we have seen and that we're promoting through the checklist is data matching and data sharing between ERA courts and other systems to quickly identify and provide assertive engagement to at-risk households. This could include households who may currently have an eviction filing, and then working with the courts to outreach to landlords and proactively pay off debt prior to an eviction hearing. Could include using Urban Institute's web-based tool that you'll learn about a little bit later today to identify neighborhoods and to adjust outreach strategies to better reach high-risk neighborhoods. Or it can include dedicating shares of the emergency rental assistance program to neighborhoods experiencing the greatest impacts and the greatest risks, and having multiple paths for multiple populations. The second attribute that's important for program models is coordinating with your local continuum of care and coordination programs systems to outreach and provide access to households who are exiting homelessness or who face the greatest risk of homelessness, and having that information sharing available. Lastly, serving households with federal rent subsidies and engaging public housing authorities and developing mechanisms to refer tenants directly to ERA when they need it. In addition to the attributes of model programs, there are additional key strategies that can promote equity and access that we recommend programs take advantage of. You'll see 6 of them listed here today, and we'll just quickly talk about them. The first is ensuring marketing and outreach materials are available through multiple methods, such as door knocking, maybe pop-up clinics, community events, social media, in multiple languages, and ensuring that they're accessible to people living with disabilities. Another attribute is engaging landlords with small portfolio of units who may be leasing to the most at-risk households and may not know about ERA or have trouble accessing the program. And then developing strategies that pay off debt maybe to multiple units at one time, really streamlining that process. Third, really distributing program information and conducting intake at critical points of intervention, not just waiting for folks to come to ERA programs. Going to courts, libraries, homeless services providers, food pantries, housing counseling offices, health centers, vaccination sites, the list goes on, to proactively target extremely low-income households who may be receiving support in these other settings. It's not only important to adopt these attributes and model programs, but it's very important to clearly communicate program policies and procedures. People need to know the circumstances under which self-attestation, direct attendant assistance, appeal processes, and other flexible program features are available and when they're allowed. Clear communication really ensures greater access and avoids miscommunication. If it's not communicated, people will assume it's not possible. Next, we want to make sure that programs are establishing ERA tables in courts, really having that court connection and having that in-person, when possible, availability of providers to do applications and to assist landlords and tenants in real time. Lastly, using data to develop and regularly update dashboards to be able to track intakes and progress and to make program improvements as needed. You can find examples of different dashboards around the country on our resource hub, and I really encourage you to go to the resource hub to learn more about these models. So with that overview, I'd love for us to get into some really concrete information. So I'm going to turn it over to Barb Poppe, who will highlight strategies to advance equity and impact through ERA via the framework that Barb and many of our national partners have been working on. I will then pass it over to you, Barb.
Thank you, Sarah. Greetings to all who joined us today. It's great to be with you. I'm Barb Poppe. Today, I'm here on behalf of the Framework for an Equitable COVID-19 Homelessness Response. And I want to talk about ways that you can advance equity and impact through using the ERA dollars that have been made available through the federal government. So next slide. So this work that the Equitable Framework is doing includes a really amazing group of organizations that are participating. The coalition has been a strong ally in this. Next up on the panel is my colleague at the Urban Institute, Sam Batko. That organization has been really active, and you can see others have been here. So it's been a real exciting time to be involved with these partners. Over the past 15 months, we've been working together on the Equitable Frameworks. Next slide. So the framework initially established these guiding strategies, and they remain true today. The first concept we're advancing is the importance of advancing racial justice and equity. It's never been more important than it is today in the midst of the pandemic. And that leads us to our second priority, which is addressing the highest needs first. And as we have come together, we really believe that people who are on our streets, in shelters, experiencing homelessness are amongst the most vulnerable in our country to the ravages of the pandemic. To get out of the situations that we find ourselves, it's really important to grow partnerships. And many of these are partnering with organizations that you might have longstanding relationships, but also reaching out and finding new partners in this work. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the ideas that we've been sharing. Central priority is obviously getting people into housing. People experiencing homelessness, the solution is access to a safe, decent place to live, and that is a top priority for our work. And then, of course, acting quickly. This is a humanitarian crisis, and we need to get folks inside and into safe, long-term settings as quickly as possible. Next slide. So today I want to talk about three things. First, just a little bit about why we see this as a historic opportunity to reduce homelessness. Second, how mobilizing emergency rental assistance to prevent and end homelessness is possible. And thirdly, share with you some tips for design, partnership, and resource allocation. Next slide. So I just can't underscore enough what historic opportunity we have before us to prevent and end homelessness. The needs are enormous and the resources we have are historic. So let's look at the next slide. So we know that housing instability and homelessness are inextricably linked to longstanding racial disparities and have been amplified during the pandemic. At the same time, we're seeing unprecedented federal resources that have been made available that can be used to address these longstanding racial disparities and homelessness, not homeliness. I guess like the spell check got me there. I think that the time to pause here is if we do not move forward with equitable responses, we in fact will increase racial disparities in our country. So it's really important we're focused on this. And to do that, we are seeing the importance of focusing resources on those with the greatest risk of homelessness. And homelessness has extreme racial disparities. So folks' risk of homelessness is has a disparate impact on people who are Black, Indigenous, or other people of color. Anyone who has a prior history of homelessness, whether it's recent or even as a child, those who are at the lowest income levels, staying in more informal living arrangements. And what we mean by this are folks who are doubled up or couch surfing or living temporarily in hotels. We also see an adverse impact on immigrant households and people who communicate in different languages. Survivors of domestic, intimate partner, or sexual violence are also at extremely high risk of homelessness, as are people with disabilities and disabling conditions, or those who have prior histories of justice involvement or eviction. So as you think about targeting resources, it's important to target on those categories. We have a range of interventions to help us address homelessness. And if we look to my left side of the screen, you see rehousing. And this is a strategy that will have the greatest impact on those who are currently experiencing homelessness. As we move up the risk ladder, those who are kind of knocking at the door of the shelter or are just at the brink of homelessness diversion has been shown to be very effective. Folks who have a little more time and are often in these informal settings need homelessness prevention assistance. And then many people are at risk of eviction, and many of those individuals have the potential for falling into homelessness, but the risk is not as great as those who are actually knocking on the shelter door. Next slide. When we think about these interventions, the reality is they are very similar. There's a component for financial assistance to help with with housing support or other needs. And then there also needs to be some services that are helping them with housing problem solving and housing search and other strategies to get back into housing or maintain their housing. So financial assistance plus services is the most important parts of the package. Next slide. So how do we do that? And how can using emergency rental assistance be important in that effort? Next slide. There actually are a lot of resources that have been available from the federal government over the past 15 months. The largest source of funding is the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, which is what we're talking about today. And as you can see from our kind of screening across, many programs can provide help with rental and utility assistance, but the largest and the one with the timeline that is really looming out there is the ERAP program. It can provide funding for some very limited services, but it can't fund other financial assistance. So as you look across these different sources of funding under the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan, what we're going to recommend that you think about is how do you braid and leverage those resources to get to a complete set of services that can provide rehousing, homelessness diversion, or homelessness prevention. Next slide. So I first want to clarify, it has been increasingly clear under the Biden administration that ERA can be used for rehousing. And this quote here really speaks to it. These dollars can be a pathway to people getting housed regardless of whether they've experienced an eviction, they have been living outside in shelters, or feel like they are going to have to move because they are under pressure where they are now. I know in the early days of ERAP, there was this belief that it couldn't be used to address rehousing and homelessness, but now it's absolutely clear. Next slide shows a few of the places as cited in the Treasury guidance about the ways you can use these funds for rehousing assistance. And these funds are really critical to use. It's been clarified that funds can be used, that you don't have to currently be in your home in order to be eligible for that. You do have to be entering into a lease agreement or some sort of an agreement. You can use the funding to help folks temporarily be put up in hotels or motels if they would otherwise be on the streets. You can use it for housing relocation expenses such as security deposits and rental fees. And there is a provision in there that you can use it for master lease agreements. And this can be really helpful to households who have perhaps some barriers to housing and have a harder time getting into a lease arrangement. So a master lease is actually allowed. Next slide. There are many sources of services funding available to go with the emergency rental assistance. I'm just going to call out a couple here. First is under HHS. There are several places where there's health services funding opportunities available. There's a big infusion of funding for behavioral health grants. Federally qualified health centers, community health centers have extra funding through the American Rescue Plan, and there's been expanded Medicaid eligibility. So check into the health services as potential supports to go with your rental assistance. There also is some new funding available under the Homeless Children and Youth at the Department of Education. This can be used to provide wraparound services to children and their families. Next slide. So, the possibilities are nearly endless. There's just so many different ways that you can get to a more holistic solution to addressing homelessness. And I'm going to share with you kind of 4 ideas that we put together. First idea is diversion and rapid rehousing for homeless adults and transition age youth. If you use ERA to provide the prospective rental assistance and address the arrearages, you can then use your emergency solutions grant coronavirus funds to provide time-limited housing services. And if you partner with neighborhood, BIPOC-led, and LGBTQ organizations to conduct the outreach, engagement, and serve the population, you will be making significant progress on reducing disparities in your community. Another idea is to focus on vulnerable families and provide them with rapid rehousing. Again, use that ERA to address the arrearages and the move-in costs. If you're working with unsheltered families, go ahead, you can put them in a motel. Connect with your local school district to get some services funding through this ARP dollars. And then also with emergency, you can connect them with your housing authority and your continuum of care to provide the ongoing rental assistance as the family is stabilized in that. And it's absolutely working with vulnerable families. Strongly suggest you work with BIPOC-led organizations to provide the services. Next slide, we look at idea number 3. And this is a targeted population idea, but you can take this in many ways. Perhaps you are trying to address the needs of pregnant homeless women and families with young children who you're finding in targeted neighborhoods who need prevention services to avoid falling into homelessness. You can use the Urban Institute targeting tool to figure out which neighborhoods to look for them in. Use your ERA dollars to address arrearages, move-in costs, and rental assistance. Partner with the ESG CV providers to provide the housing stabilization services, and then pull in your federally qualified health center as your partner for maternal and infant health care and supports. This would provide a very holistic approach in your community by bringing these partners together. Idea number 4 really leverages off of the tremendous work that has been done in many communities to stand up non-congregate shelter in hotels. But as the FEMA deadline is looming at the end of September, these hotels often are going to be demobilized or decommissioned. And so you can use your ERA dollars to help households move out of the hotels. You can partner with the federally qualified health centers to provide healthcare and supports, and then get the services again with your ESG CV provider. I want to strongly suggest you think about how you can bring peer specialists on the rehousing team. We know this will be a really important way to advance equity and achieve better outcomes. Next slide. So if you want to learn more about the different funding streams, please go to the framework website. You can also see the recording of some webinars we've done recently. So next slide, keep us moving along here. So key takeaways, next slide. Let's start with design. First of all, we suggest you set a numeric goal to rehouse a number of homeless households. What are you setting as your benchmark? Go ahead and expand and enhance your rapid rehousing to reduce the number of families who are experiencing homelessness. I just want to say there's so many families who have fallen into homelessness over the last 15 months. They really need assistance. And you're going to need to retool your programs to address current pandemic challenges. So you may be looking to lengthen or make your programs more intensive. You want to partner with people with lived expertise to design the improvements so that you're able to outreach and identify with existing programs as well as new programs. And you want to assertively use the HUD waivers and Treasury flexibility to assure all of the programs you're funding are low barrier. Next slide. As we think about the importance of partnership, first, top of the list is design, plan, and implement with BIPOC-led organizations. Design, plan, and implement with your continuums of care and your homeless assistance providers. They have resources they can contribute to this, but they also, both types of organizations are going to help you really market and outreach to the population who needs it. Partnering with people who have lived expertise is incredibly important and been shown to be very successful in outreach and engagement. And partnering with a broader array of programs in the community, like your schools, your community health centers, Medicaid-funded behavioral health providers, bring them into the mix so you're providing holistic and comprehensive services. As far as allocation of funding goes, be sure you're braiding and leveraging. Focus on ensuring homeless households as well as those at most risk of homelessness are served holistically. Allocate sufficient resources to scale your homelessness diversion and rehousing before investing in homeless prevention. That will do the most to reduce homelessness. Partner with people with lived expertise and rapidly deploy and then plan to redeploy funding as your local context and needs change. Next slide. There's lots of tools and resources we have available at the framework. I encourage you to take a look at those. Next slide. We also have a series of webinars that are coming up. I know many communities are trying to figure out how they can manage housing navigation and landlord engagement. That webinar is on August 5th. Next slide. Whew, I got through all my content. Back to you, Sarah.
Great, thanks, Barb. That was amazing. For clarification, a question came up around what is a master lease in the Q&A. So could you just clarify what that is for folks who may not know?
Yes, so a master lease is when an organization is leasing the unit and then they establish a lease with the tenant. And that allows it's a really great strategy for households who are having a hard time getting a landlord being willing to rent to them. So having someone as your kind of intermediary in there really can make housing available to folks who have barriers that are hard to get landlords to kind of work around.
Great, thanks. And then this is more of a comment, but I'll turn it into a question. I hear it a lot around, many communities, this is from Grand Rapids, are faced with a housing shortage and just really a feeling of lack of units available, as well as sort of low quality or may not meet standards. They may be hazardous. Any strategies for folks who may be dealing with that or having that conversation locally on how they can overcome that idea of housing shortage? We know development is a long-term strategy, but any short-term pointers?
Yeah, absolutely. The lack of quality supply is a problem in many, many communities and it continues to grow every day. First of all, I would say make sure you're advocating for passage of the infrastructure bill because there's really important supports in there. I think the other strategies we're seeing is that people are working on shared housing. So they're helping folks kind of partner up and then establishing folks together in housing. There's a webinar series coming up about strategies that are being used for landlord navigation and getting landlords to be more willing to do that. And that's coming up on August 5th. So there'll be some more practical tips there. I would say it is really difficult, but being creative and offering the kinds of incentives and for landlords, often the most important thing they want is someone to call when they have a concern. And I think that's where partnering with your continuum of care, who can provide the services through their ESG funding, along with the ERA dollars, get you to a more holistic package than just rental assistance alone.
Great, Thanks, Barb. And then also just one more question. I think, this amazing strategies, and I love the connection to other service systems around education and the health centers that are in the health field that we should be partnering with. Oftentimes though, that can seem daunting, and especially with the Saturday kind of looming at us in the eviction moratorium ending. I'm wondering if you have any sort of priorities that you would lay out for folks of where to focus now and how to take all of this great information over the next few weeks and really to prioritize those conversations. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that where I would prioritize the resources are those who are the most vulnerable to experiencing homelessness. So if you're dealing with a large queue and you don't know who to pick from your queue, pick those neighborhoods, pick people who have prior histories of homelessness, because those strategies are ones those are the people who are most likely to fall into homelessness. It's not to say that eviction isn't a tragedy for all who experience it, and there's a lot of collateral damage, but experiencing literal homelessness and being on the streets is really tough. I think the other place I would focus is for communities that are offering these non-congregate shelters that are going to lose their FEMA money at the end of September. I would say go in and be sure that you're not expecting to close those hotels and move people back into congregate shelter environments. That is just not a good situation. So I would make sure you have plans in place to, if you're going to demobilize, you can use the ERA dollars to help with that demobilization.
Great. Those are great suggestions. Thank you so much. Thank Barb so much. And I think with that, you mentioned and I mentioned the urban database, and there was a question in our chat on it. So we're going to transition over to Samantha Batko, who's a senior research associate at Urban Institute and has been instrumental in developing and in implementing the tool. And she's here to talk to us about it. So Samantha, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Okay, so some very quick background on the tool. It was developed in partnership with the Framework for an Equitable COVID-19 Homelessness Response, which is the partnership that Barb had spoken about and included the same group of partners. We originally published the tool in August of 2020 with support from the Melville Charitable Trust and the MacArthur Foundation. And we recently updated the tool in April 2021 with the most recently available data with support from the Schultz Foundation. And so some of you might be asking, if you haven't seen the tool before or haven't used it, what is the tool for? Why is it important? How does it work? Why would you use it? And so the tool is really to help local decision makers, people who are going to make decisions about who is eligible, who's prioritized, how to allocate and spend your rental assistance funds in order to help reduce homelessness and evictions. These would include your ESG funds, your CDBG funds, your emergency rental assistance funds coming through the U.S. Treasury. And so all of the decision makers and all of the people who influence those decision makers may find this tool to be helpful. And the way that the tool works is that it uses census tracts and information about low-income renters who live in those census tracts to determine neighborhoods who may have people who are at the highest risk of experiencing housing instability or homelessness, and who will most urgently need those rent assistance resources. So within the continuum that Barb was talking about, this is going to help you identify people who are currently housed, who may need these resources in order to remain housed. And the way that it does this is that the tool incorporates a number of risk factors that are tied directly to eviction and homelessness, and also to the risks that we've seen exposed by COVID-19. So how people are using the tool, and before I get into what the tool is built on and what it looks like and how you can navigate it, just so that when you see those, you can think about how you might want to use the tool in your own community. These are the ways that some people are using the tool. So most importantly, obviously for today, what we're doing is talking about outreach. So people can use the tool, and there are jurisdictions in the country right now using the tool to do targeted outreach. They're doing, they're adding an additional level of effort within the outreach efforts that they currently have for what they would be deemed high priority neighborhoods based on the tool. You could also partner with grassroots organizations as part of those outreach strategies and other community-based organizations that may not even be rent assistance organizations, but are embedded in the neighborhoods in which you want to prioritize and can help you get information out about the availability of rent assistance, and also that could potentially help people navigate the application process. Some other jurisdictions are also using the tool to create preferences or prioritization within their applicants. So if you have more applicants than you're able to serve, you could give additional points or weight to people who are applying from within those priority neighborhoods. And you can also use the tool to monitor program metrics with regards to whether or not your application complete rates are high in what would be considered high priority neighborhoods, and or whether or not people in those high priority neighborhoods ultimately receive assistance. So how is the tool built? The tool is built, we call it the Emergency Rental Assistance Priority Index. It has actually 3 sub-indices within it. The first is our housing instability indicators. And these indicators are built on measures that have been empirically tied to the rate of eviction and homelessness in a jurisdiction. So they're severe housing cost burden, severe overcrowding, unemployment, share of renters, and poverty. All of these measures have been consistently and repeatedly tied to evictions and homelessness based on available evidence, and they're ones that directly correlate to increases in both of those as they worsen in a jurisdiction. The second sub-index is on COVID-19 specific indicators. So one is percent uninsured. This is actually percent uninsured in 2019. So it is immediately prior to the pandemic. It essentially is accounting for people who might be most economically destabilized by not having health insurance if they were to contract COVID-19. The other here is an economic measure for job loss associated with COVID-19. And this is pulling from another urban tool that was created that looks at the census tracts where workers who were in the most affected industries lost their jobs and where those workers live. The third sub-index is an equity sub-index, and this index is really built around our knowledge of who is overrepresented among people who are evicted, who is overrepresented among people who experience homelessness, and who is the least likely to be able to navigate successfully an application process for assistance. So people who would struggle to be able to get onto assistance. These measures come from those that we are aware of that are predictors for homelessness entry, as well as who we know was disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, both in terms of health and economics. Before we published the tool, we did some work to validate the measures that we were using. Essentially, the 2 primary ways we did this before initial publication was to test all of our indicators against each other to ensure that each of our indicators were adding something individual to the overall index. And we did not find significant correlation between between each of our index pairs or indicator pairs, which means that each individual indicator is adding something independent to the index. We also did ground truthing. And so we worked with 4 communities in different areas of the country to walk through the different sub-indices and the overall index with community leaders in those jurisdictions to understand whether or not these were places where they felt like they had high shelter entries, where they felt, if they felt this was places where evictions were occurring, if these were consistent with areas that they knew would be in high need for emergency rental assistance. And we made some adjustments to the tool based on that ground truthing in terms of weighting. And we also made some notations of key limitations of the tool, which I'll also talk about in a little bit. Before we made the update in April of 2021, we did an analysis of past evictions in every single state and also current evictions that were happening during the COVID-19 period in 13 cities. And what we found was that the ERAF index correlated strongly with both past evictions and current evictions, and that really importantly, what we were finding were that the people who had, or the neighborhoods that had been the most at risk of evictions before the pandemic remained the neighborhoods who were the most at risk of evictions during the pandemic. And so what that tells us is that people who were already in vulnerable positions before the pandemic were the people who were the most vulnerable during the pandemic as well. And our validation efforts on the tool have not ceased. We are continuing work right now. We're working on an analysis of current evictions and 211 calls, which are requests for assistance in up to 18 cities. And we're also going to be doing analysis of priority neighborhoods identified with the ERAF index and how those align with historically redlined areas in cities as well. A couple of notes about the data. So as I mentioned, when we talked a little bit about the ground truthing efforts, the sub-indexes are weighted. So the housing sub-index is weighted more heavily within the total index based on our knowledge and the level of empirical data that ties the indicators within that index to evictions and homelessness. And race is weighted more heavily within the equity index to acknowledge both the overrepresentation of people of color among those who are evicted and who ultimately experience homelessness, as well as the drastic differences in the experience of COVID-19 infection and economic impacts among people of color. Some things to note when you take a look at the tool is that there are some grayed out tracks. Some of those are tracks that don't have housing in them. So for example, if you're familiar with Washington, D.C., the National Mall is grayed out. Others are grayed out because it means that there are no extremely low-income renters in those census tracts. And therefore, those would not be tracts that would be prioritized regardless of other economic measures. A couple of key limitations to it. While we did find that the index correlated to past evictions and current evictions, you should just be aware that the data is on a lag. So it means that the most recent data included in the tool is from 2019 census data, with the exception of one measure, which is updated as of April 2021, which is the job loss measure for COVID-19. Another key indicator or another key issue that or limitation that we have is that the tool does seem to highlight university census tracts. This is something that we identified during our ground truthing activity. We know that there are students who experience homelessness, and we know that there are students who have housing instability. We did not make any changes on the basis of this, but we do think it's important for communities to understand that university tracts may be highlighted and highly prioritized, even though all of the people who are in those tracts may not meet the typical profile of a household that would need assistance. The last limitation is that we do have a single race indicator. This was a decision that our data and science team made because of data quality concerns around including multiple race measures, particularly in rural areas where the margin of error is so significant that it just is really challenging to look at census tract level data on individual race measures. We recognize this as a limitation in that obviously people of different races experience eviction, homelessness, have experienced COVID-19 differently. We have used the single race indicator because of data quality decisions, but we have also made adjustments to the tool with things like graying out areas that don't have extremely low income renters so that it minimizes the impact that the single race measure would have in areas where obviously people of color is not a homogeneous group. So normally at this point in the presentation, I do a demonstration. I don't have that capacity today. So what I'm going to do is actually use screenshots. So hopefully everybody can see on their screen, and I invite you to go and take a look at the tool, which has been sent out in the chat. If you want to follow along, you can. So when you get to the tool, you have the ability to search by both county and by continuum of care. In this instance, I've selected Columbus, Ohio, which is Franklin County, Ohio. And I've selected one census tract here in the more southwestern portion of the city that is in the 98th percentile, meaning that among all census tracts in the state of Ohio, this would be a census tract that would be among the most high in priority. And you can see here that it shows you where each of, where the census tract falls within each of the individual sub-indices as well. And so this is one where historic housing instability and equity they remain in the top 5 percentiles of prioritization, but they had experienced slightly less COVID-19 impact, which is again, health insurance and a lack of health insurance and COVID-19 job loss. And a feature that I want to highlight here within the tool is that you'll see right here, it shows for each tract how many ELI renters are in that tract. So in this census tract, there are 470 extremely low income renters. And that's really important because when you get to look at other priority census tracts, you'll see that those numbers vary a lot. Just another, before moving to that, another feature of the search is that if you're a continuum of care and you'd like to see your full continuum of care, you can actually search by your continuum care number as well. So you don't have to know the county, and it also enables you, if you're a continuum of care and your continuum of care has multiple counties in it, to see all of those counties at once. Obviously, my example is not a multi-county COC. This is the same census tract here, just highlighted within the continuum of care display. And what you'll see is I'm going to select a different census tract now, and you'll see that while it's in essentially the same priority level, we're now up here in the north central part of the county. In the 97th percentile tract, it matches fairly high across all of the sub-indices, but there's only 150 ELI renters. So what that enables you to do is to not only identify priority neighborhoods, but also to think about the scale of the response that you might need in each of those neighborhoods. So if you, for example, were going to do targeting of outreach using the tool, and you had those two census tract, one that was in 98th percentile and had 470 ELI renters, and one who was in the 97th and 150 ELI renters, you might say, well, we want to make sure that we have people knocking on doors in both of these neighborhoods, and we're going to send 4 people to knock on doors in the first census tract and only 1 person to knock on doors in this other census tract. And that would be reflected because of how many ELI renters you had in these respective census tracts. So a couple of other key things here. One, we're going to stick in Columbus for a moment, and this is just to highlight for you the limitation I was talking about earlier. This yellow highlighted census tract right here is actually where Ohio State is located. So you can see that it's showing up in the 91st percentile among Ohio tracts. And when we spoke with leaders in Columbus about this, they said this is not typically a census tract in which they would see a lot of emergency rental assistance being needed or being delivered. But it is being highlighted because of a large percentage of students in a rental apartment and rental units that are matching some of our other measures. So that's just an example of one of the limitations that you should be aware of. And it's also one of the reasons that we think that the tool should be used within and along with other data sets that you may have, which could include COVID-19 infection or morbidity rates. It could include any shelter entry data that you may have by neighborhood, or any other measures that you may want to use and pair with it, as well as just really nuanced contextual knowledge that you have about your own communities, like the location of universities. Lastly, I just want to highlight something that is really important when you use the tool, which is that every time I've been talking about a census tract, and every time you'll see it displayed, you'll see that it says the 96th percentile among a state's tracts. That's because every single census tract is benchmarked to the average of their state. This enables us to be able to see much more granular differences within states as opposed to across the entire country, but it has key limitations. So for example, this is Kansas City. This gray line here is the state border line, and you can see dark tracks on both sides of the state line, but you can't compare the census tracts on the left side of the state line to the census tracts on the right, because these are benchmarked off of, the left is benchmarked off of Kansas and the right is benchmarked off of Missouri. So that's just really important if you live near a county that borders another state, and if you have resources that for any reason might be shared across state lines, that the 91st percentile in one state is not equivalent to the 91st percentile in the other state, and you need to be aware of that. And if you want help navigating that, you can always reach out to the urban team, and we're happy to help you figure out how to navigate that. So if you want to get the data, how do you do that? One, there's a link for using the tool. I think it's been sent out a couple of times during the presentation. The other is that you can download the data from our data catalog, and then you can use it. You can upload it into your own jurisdictions, ArcGIS. You can pair it with any other data sets that you want to. That's how a lot of people are currently using it. And if you need any assistance in being able to do that, the urban team can also help you with that. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Sam. That was amazing. Great information and very useful. A couple questions came in, and when I was thinking of two is, you talked about some of the uses. Do you think, or have you seen this tool used to determine categorical eligibility, or to meet presumptive eligibility under ERA's proxy eligibility? Has it happened, or do you think it would be useful to do that to lower documentation requirements?
We have not seen people use it for eligibility. We have seen people use it for prioritization. So in terms of weighting applications, there are places that are among a number of other priority measures using it to prioritize specific applications. I do know that you can use like average income for your neighborhood in order to minimize documentation requirements. You can pull some of that data from the tool itself, and so you would be able to get that information here, but I'm not aware of anybody who's done that yet.
Great, thanks. And then another question came in on, were homeless youth a part of the analysis? And if so, how were they included?
Yeah, so unfortunately for this tool, we are, in order to be able to update it regularly and have information at the census tract level and across every single jurisdiction, we are somewhat hampered in what types of data we can use. And so unfortunately, we weren't able to incorporate any homelessness specific data because it doesn't exist on the national level at a census tract data point. And so we were not able to include homeless youth data. We weren't able to include shelter entry data. We weren't able to include anything that is held at the zip code level, and we weren't able to include anything that's only held at the local level. So for example, when we first made this tool, we really wanted to include COVID infection rates, but we couldn't get census tract level data consistently across the states, and so we weren't able to include it. That's one of the reasons that we encourage people to layer this tool with other local data that they have as well.
Great. Thank you, Sam. This was really great. I know there's a few other questions in the chat or the Q&A if you want to take a look and answer them. If not, we have time later, we can get to them. But I do want to move to our panel conversation now and introduce Peggy Bailey, Senior Advisor for Rental Assistance at HUD, who will be guiding and facilitating a conversation on some strategies that have been used in practice to enhance outreach and marketing. So Peggy, I will turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And thanks to the National Low Income Housing Coalition for inviting me to moderate today's panel. It is critical that we aren't passive as it relates to getting people access to emergency rental assistance. People, especially renters, don't have an expectation that a program is out there to help them. Given the scarcity of rental assistance, why would they? They don't expect for there to be resources to help them pay their rent. So that's why we have to be out in the streets to consistently get the word out and build trust with both tenants and landlords that help is available. It would be a true shame and injustice of millions or even billions of dollars were sitting around unused while evictions grow over the coming weeks and months. And that's why today the White House launched the Day of Action that Sarah mentioned at the beginning to get the word out about rent relief. You saw the link there on that slide. And so here to give you ideas of how to get the word out locally and particularly how to reach those people most at risk of eviction, as Barb and Sam both mentioned in their presentations, here is today's panel. First up, so I'm going to just run through who's on the panel. You'll see the links in the chat for their organizations, as Sarah mentioned at the top, to learn more about them. And then they'll pass, the format for today will be that they'll give brief presentations at the beginning, and then we'll have some discussion and the questions that you're submitting in the chat as we at the end. So first up is Dr. Joél Arvizo-Zavala, who is the curriculum specialist and researcher with the Utah Division of Multicultural Affairs, and he's also a research consultant with the Utah Commission on Criminal Justice and Juvenile Justice. Then we'll have speakers from Santa Clara, Aaron Stanton, Director of Family Assistance at Sacred Heart Community Service, and James Ho, who is a case manager with the Asian American Center of Santa Clara. And finally, you'll have Terry Hickey, who is the Deputy Director of Housing and Community Development at the Baltimore County Department of Health and Human Services. As I said, you'll see links to their organizations in the chat, and we'll have questions at the end. And so now I will pass it off to Dr. Zavala.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. So I definitely have some quick information that I would like to share with you regarding our work with the state of Utah. So as Peggy mentioned, I work with both the Utah Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice as well as the Utah Division of Multicultural Affairs. Today, I'll be talking about our evictions research with the Utah Division of Multicultural Affairs. So starting in September of last year, September of 2020, one of the Multicultural Affairs committees for the COVID-19 response was really interested in understanding evictions in the state of Utah and whether or not there were racial ethnic disparities. One of the questions that this committee had for us as a research team was around not only whether or not there are disparities in evictions, but whether or not the moratorium placed on evictions was sufficient or was contributing either positively or negatively to evictions in the state of Utah, especially as it relates to Black, Indigenous, people of color, or BIPOC communities. And so one of the things that we did is we took data from the Utah State Courts regarding evictions. And so this was data that the Utah State Courts provided to us regarding eviction filing specifically. And then we layered that with census data, and we did an analysis at the zip code level. One of the things that we found from this research is we did find that there were racial ethnic disparities both prior and during the pandemic, and that the moratorium did not sufficiently address any racial ethnic disparities that were present the year prior to the pandemic. And this stated a significant decrease in the number of evictions throughout the state. However, it did not affect necessarily in a positive way Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. And so that was one of the major findings that we had. As a result, we worked collaboratively with a number of housing authorities across the state of Utah, as well as with the Utah Department of Workforce Services to get data on rental assistance. And eventually what we did with our evictions data is we layered it with rental assistance data and sort of began to paint a picture regarding where rental assistance was going in the state and whether or not rental assistance was impacting.
Oh no, did we lose Joél? I think we might have. He just recently moved and might be having Wi-Fi issues. So while we see if he's able to reconnect, I apologize for the jump, but maybe we can have him come back at the end, and Erin, we can pitch it to you to go over what the great work that's happening in Santa Clara.
Absolutely, we could jump in. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Erin Stanton. I work at Sacred Heart Community Service in Santa Clara County, California. And I'm here today with my colleague, James, who works with one of our partner organizations, the Asian American Center of Santa Clara County. Together with many partner organizations, we've been focused on providing financial assistance to COVID impacted households since the beginning of the pandemic. And we're currently working on our fourth phase, deploying the emergency rental assistance funds. Next slide. Our primary focus is providing the financial assistance to extremely low income households, especially households of color. Throughout our work, we use data to assess if we are meeting that target and getting the assistance to our target population. So for example, if you look at the slide, you can see that our highest financial assistance zip codes align with the zip codes in our community that have been most impacted by COVID-19. Next slide. And the way we do our work is we do it in partnership. We know we can never do it alone. This is a huge effort. We have a number of organizations helping to coordinate it and an even larger group going out and doing the work. Throughout the past year, there have been about 70 organizations that have been part of this effort, and there are currently 45 organizations partnering on the current phase. We do this because we need all hands on deck. It's a big program, and we also need organizations that are connected to the communities and cultures and neighborhoods in Santa Clara County. Historically, most assistance programs have been designed for kind of a white middle class standard that has certain expectations about what documentation is available and what the level of trust is with public institutions. And that type of program design really doesn't work for the people that are most at risk of losing their housing as a result of the pandemic. So we work with a huge group of partners that are deeply connected to community and that are experts in helping community members navigate complex systems. And a big part of that is that we coordinate funding so that all of our partner organizations have the resources to do the work. We also focus on a no wrong door approach. So you can see on the slide on the screen, in our community, we're a hybrid community, which means there is a state emergency rental assistance program and a local emergency rental assistance program. And they both have slightly different eligibility criteria, which can be really, really confusing. So we adopted a dual outreach approach where we're doing outreach for both programs and trying to help folks figure out which one is right for them and connect them to the right program. We also adopt a no wrong door approach throughout our system of partners, where folks can go to any of those partner organizations as well as to a more centralized online application, central phone number, et cetera. And we also strive to connect with existing outreach efforts in our community. For example, one current effort we're excited about is that the county is one of our partners, and they are currently training some of their community partners who do vaccine outreach, that when they go door to door to talk about vaccines, they can also connect households to rental assistance. Next slide. So we've been doing this over the past year during the pandemic. We've learned a lot. You can read on the slide some of what we've learned and think are good recommendations going forward. I think to summarize it, I would say we believe in starting with community and ending with community. We have to start by actually going to the community members that we hope to give financial assistance to ask them, what do they need? What will work for them to access it? So for example, doing surveys, holding community meetings, and then we take that input to help us design our program. And in the end, we need to make sure that that financial assistance actually gets into the hands of community, that it comes and ends with the community as well. And we assess that by looking at our data throughout our process and also by listening and collecting feedback, again, through surveys, through community meetings, so that we can learn and do better the next time, because there is always room for improvement. And with that, I would love to introduce James, my colleague at one of our wonderful partner organizations, to share a little bit about his experience with this program. I think you're still on mute, James.
Okay, so hi, my name is James. I am one of the case managers for AASC. We're one of the organizations partnering with Destination Home for this rental assistance. And so I just wanted to talk about my experiences and also provide some insight that I've gained over the course of our involvement with the program. So for our particular agency, we have a lot of connection with our community, in particular through a lot of events and a lot of other programs that we've done in the past that have kind of let us create a relationship with many members of the community, as well as some landlords who have reached out to us personally with tenants that they are looking for rental assistance to help out with. And so, for example, when we were doing a program to go and help spread awareness for COVID-19, we were able to also kind of get more people comfortable with talking to us about a lot of these private information things that it's not necessarily as accessible to everyone, such as, you know, their income, some private information, such as certain lease agreements that are, like mentioned, they're not so formal. So for example, a large portion of the community in Santa Clara doesn't actually only lease with regular lease agreements like apartments or entire homes. We actually have a lot of residents that will lease single rooms. And so for those residents who are in less traditional forms of renting, it's been really valuable for us to be able to have their trust and allow them to feel comfortable speaking with us. And especially the vulnerable populations that don't necessarily, they're not necessarily used to getting help with these kind of programs. It's been really great that they trust us to be able to go and assist them with getting the rental assistance they need. Because in particular, I would say that a large portion of the applicants that I've worked with were at risk of being evicted at the end of June before the eviction moratorium was extended, and also many of them were worried about being evicted in July. And so the ability for us to directly work with our tenants in the community, as well as get direct access to working with liaisons in Destination Home, has really helped expedite the process of providing rental assistance to our community. And so we found that it's been very important for us to directly have these relationships in order to go and allow the process to move smoothly.
Great, thanks, James and Aaron. I really appreciate it. It looks like, Joél, were you able to join back in?
Yes, is everyone able to hear me?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. So I'm going to go ahead and keep my video off, but I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quickly as I just have a few more items to share. So as I was mentioning earlier, and then if I could get sharing permissions, please. As I was mentioning earlier, you know, we did find that there were racial ethnic disparities in evictions. And then as we overlaid the data with the rental assistance application data from some of the housing agencies in the Department of Workforce Services, we learned very quickly that there were some areas that had experienced a high rate of evictions in the state of Utah, some zip code areas that had high rates of evictions, but also simultaneously were receiving adequate numbers of approved rental assistance applications. In the state of Utah, we did have a few zip codes of concern. Two of those zip codes, 84101 and 84111, are located in Utah. And so these are areas that have high rates of development and many other sort of like developmental or, you know, cultural, social issues that need to be laid with the data. And so what we did is we provided the information to a number of agencies across the state of Utah, as both public and nonprofit. And many of these agencies were able to utilize this data to target rental assistance applications, information, marketing, and et cetera, to the areas of greatest need. One of the hopes that we have as we move forward with this eviction research is to utilize the current or most updated rental assistance application data to then understand, okay, you know, have we provided sufficient or have we conducted sufficient outreach to zip codes that have a high rate of disparity? And if so, how do we share the success in these areas and share success stories, you know, to a much broader audience? So we're very excited in the state of Utah to continue this research, but particularly excited, you know, to obviously alleviate over time racial ethnic disparities in evictions. So thank you so much for having me be a part of the panel today, and I look forward to the questions that folks have later on.
Great, thank you. And so now, Terry, I'll pass it to you.
All right, thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I am the director of the Department of Housing and Community Development in Baltimore County, which is one of the larger counties in the state of Maryland that sits all the way around Baltimore City, but isn't part of the city. I'm going to focus, I think, from the local government perspective. I'm going to take a really pragmatic approach to this over the next few minutes and talk about what it really looks like to try to do outreach and targeting of the most vulnerable people in our jurisdiction in the middle of a financial crisis that's continuing to grow, that's already spreading local resources thin, and dealing with any number of changes in federal guidance and deadlines for getting money spent. So with this slide, I'm not going to spend time on this, but sometimes it's helpful when you're listening to these presentations to benchmark against local jurisdictions. And so I wanted you to see how Baltimore County has tried to allocate its funding to date and the amount of money we're talking about. That way, when I say things we're doing, you can kind of say, well, we have this type of money, or we're much smaller, and we might have to moderate how we think. Next slide. Similar, this one, I wanted folks to see more of a breakdown of how we allocated this money down into the different programs. I think it's important to note for what we're going to be doing next, what I'm going to talk about, that Baltimore County's really split its funding almost 50-50 between its eviction prevention program, which is a tenant-based model, similar to what a lot of you are using. And then what I'll spend a little more time talking about here is our strategic targeted eviction prevention program, which is operated through the United Way through a partnership with the county, which is really landlord-focused, bundled model that we'll talk about a little more. Slide, please. All right, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about STEP. It is a collaborative model. The county worked on this for several months with United Way. We're now in our second phase. It's being funded now completely through ERAP dollars. What we did was think of it in terms of using, and it's funny, we used the Urban Institute tool, and exactly like was said, we benchmarked against local data. We also had access through the health department to COVID data in the heart of the pandemic. So we were able to look at that. We were able to layer in local unemployment claims and other eviction vulnerability information in order to really drive this from a data standpoint. The United Way moves then through zip code by zip code based on vulnerability and works with multifamily property managers and owners that own those units in those vulnerable zip codes individually with each one of the different apartment households. The apartment personnel do a lot of the work of case management in gathering the different information and bundling it together. The United Way reviews it and then makes large lump sum payments to those landlords. Again, based on data, every phase of this program has involved focus groups, surveys, and reach out to landlords and tenants. There's been a lot of evolution of the forms, the process, and the way it works. What's interesting, though, is that we think this hits a sweet spot between focusing on more vulnerable communities, getting the money to a more focused population, but at the same time, spending the money quickly. The first phase, we were able to push out through the United Way $4.2 million in less than 10 weeks, serving about 935 households. And then I just got the numbers about 10 minutes ago. The new phase, we've been through 7 zip codes, which are half the zip code cohorts in the county, 92 apartment buildings representing over 1,500 individual households that all meet this data criteria for that area, plus the different funding requirements, $14.6 million in asks. Some of the things to think about here, again, because we're trying to be targeted, is even though this moves quickly, if they miss tenants, there's an opportunity in the program to go back and add tenants after that cohort has been served. There's also a new feature where individuals at imminent risk of eviction, the United Way will do a pre-qualification screening of that tenant, show the landlord that they will likely qualify for the STEP program when their zip code is reached, and be able to hopefully avert the eviction, effectively saying we're going to guarantee that the rent's going to be paid if you wait and don't move forward to evict. Next slide. So this is a slide I haven't used before, and I created this last night with an idea of showing you. This to me is where the rubber hits the road. So there's a lot of planning that goes into getting these programs set up before they launch. But once they launch and you're in the middle of it, it's important to continue to think about where the vulnerability is, where your gaps are. By way of comparison, we've had about 8,000, somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 unique applicants into our different portals for eviction prevention since October. We took a slice of just under 2,200 total applicants. We reviewed over 1,500 of them that were reviewed by nonprofits for support. Look at these numbers though, it's pretty dramatic. Of those 1,544 that were reviewed, less than 400 received assistance. Just under 1,200 were denied. So this was after they'd gone through the process of referral. If you look to the left, you'll see the data being tracked. Over half of those denied were denied for some combination of lack of response. That's a real problem. And we can deal with it in the questions and discussions that come, but we're going to be dedicating more resources through a call center and others to be digging into those that didn't apply. So instead of just denying them, I suspect strongly it has a lot to do with the vulnerability that they're facing in the first place, not just simply a lack of desire in finding rental relief. So again, I think in reach, for lack of a better term, we constantly need to be thinking about those that we're denying, those that aren't replying when we talk about outreach and engagement. Next slide. And then whole big topic that I saved for my last slide in my last few seconds. But basically, like most of you, the eviction preventions at the federal level and the state level are in the process of expiring. And we don't expect them to be renewed, although there is local advocacy to that. But again, by way of benchmarking, we have a backlog of approximately 52,000 failure to pay rent cases in our district court system. And that is just for Baltimore County. That's not statewide. In Baltimore County and throughout the state of Maryland, there's reserve judgments that have been issued by the courts during the pandemic when tenants issue a affirmative defense due to a state or a federal protection. They're going to be separate dockets for those reserve judgments. Landlords can't move forward to evict until they go back to court. This is a key moment for the county to intervene, and this is where our agreements with multiple legal service providers are coming into play. As you can see down here, a lot of the outreach, we have judges issuing our resource guide from the bench, constant contact with the constables and sheriffs as the need be, and then communication between the tenant-based and landlord-based programs to make sure that people aren't being missed or that they've been aligned for the programs that can serve them the quickest. So that was a whirlwind tour. I'm going to leave it there. There's a whole bunch that comes to this, as I know you all know. So I'm looking forward to the questions and discussions that follow. Thanks for having me.
Great, thanks, Terry. So as I said, please enter questions into the chat. We have a few minutes for that. I think I'm going to start, maybe this question is best for James to start, and then we can go around. So one question in the chat box, we've heard a lot about the difficulty of reaching landlords and that landlords accepting payments. So can you speak to how you engaged or did outreach to skeptical landlords or help tenants engage their landlords who have been wary of submitting the personal forms or receiving federal assistance?
I can jump in or James, are you ready?
Oh, James, you're on mute. Sorry. Oh, James, you're still on mute. There we go.
Okay, great. So the way that we've really been working with landlords and tenants, like I mentioned before, is that the relationships that we built with our community in the past through various events and programs has allowed us to kind of be more trusted in the community. And so for the most part, when we speak with our tenants will typically let other of their friends or family who are struggling with rent know about us. So they'll also go and tell them that they can reach out to us if they need any help. In addition to that, when we do the program, we also don't only call tenants, but we also call the landlords. So for tenants, we'll do various outreach efforts such as canvassing, phone calls, tabling at different events. But for after we contact the tenants and do an application with them, we also have to follow up with the landlord to go and fill out the landlord side of the application. And so when we talk to the landlords, we do our best to build their trust by demonstrating the validity of the program through other successes of other landlords being able to receive the money for the owed rent of the tenants. In addition to that, the landlords will typically also tell other landlords they know, and even certain landlords like property managers of apartments will actually refer additional cases to us once they see that we are able to provide verifiable help, of course. So actually with one particular apartment, I've received about like 10 to 11 tenants just based off of referrals from the property manager after being able to successfully help out one of the tenants. So really the greatest way to be successful in working with the landlords is to just gain their confidence and trust, and also build more of a reputable identity with the community at large. So that's my take, yeah.
Great, thanks, James. Terry, Aaron, or Joél, do you have anything to add? All right.
Good.
Great. Oh, okay. So the next question is along those lines, but specifically around for the tenants. So we know that there have been a lot of scams out there that are based off of people getting financial assistance of a variety of forms, right? And the emergency rental assistance is and so people are really worried that this is a scam, and that or that maybe this might affect their immigration status. You know, are there anything to add from the tenant perspective about gaining trust of the tenants?
So Peggy, if it's okay, I think I'll add, and I'm focused today mainly on the STEP program. I just want to emphasize no jurisdiction should ever carry their whole portfolio on a program that works directly with landlords. So there's a whole lot of other things. But I think for all the talk of adversarial relationships between landlords and tenants, what the United Way, I think, has found through STEP is there's also a familiarity with the landlord and those living in those apartment buildings. And so when the property manager is the one walking around handing out the forms, talking about the money that they can provide to erase the rental debt, we found that the tenant response in the buildings is incredibly high. And if we miss people the first time and they realize their neighbors have all gotten their rent paid, there's an opportunity to reach back even though their cohort's been missed, and go back and be added into the pile. So we actually think going through landlords in this particular program has made a real difference.
Great. Aaron, well, James, is there anything you'd like to add?
I would add, we've definitely had that come up, the concerns about scams, and we've had them happen. We've had partner organizations who had people show up on their sidewalks doing bad things. So some of the things, just tools that have been helpful, are making sure we have a publicly available phone number so that someone can call that phone number that's publicly available on a website that's associated with trusted institutions and reach the program. So they know, like, sometimes they'll even just call and check. Hey, I talked to so-and-so who said they were going to help me with my application. Can you please confirm they work for your program? And having that we can help people confirm this is not a scam. And then also just really going through trusted entities, through our partner organizations that already have trust in the community, and people already know them and know they're legit. And then from there, it goes with the word of mouth. Like we've heard from the other speakers that, oh, my friend did it and it was okay, nothing bad happened, they got their rent paid, great, now I trust it more. And that word of mouth network is really, really critical. And I think that goes for the concerns around public charge or anything happening related to immigration status as well. That's a huge concern for many folks in our community, and having a message come through trusted entities that we believe this will not impact your immigration status, that we will not be reporting this information. You need those trusted voices for that to be believed.
Right. Anything else to add?
Yes, this is Joél. What I'd like to add is One of the things that has been instrumental to our success in the state of Utah has been those partnerships with the nonprofit and community-based organizations. When we look at issues of immigration status and for folks who are, in mixed status families, who are undocumented or even documented, these folks face particular challenges regarding, their access to rental assistance and other programs, as folks have already mentioned, and even as the question itself alluded to. But for us, what we understand is we can't shy away from having the conversations about what it means, to have mixed immigration status within a family, or, for an individual to be undocumented. And so through our partnerships across the state agencies and with the community-based organizations, we have put in safety measures in place so that folks know that this is a reliable source. Here's how we're protecting information. Here's the information that we are asking, and here's the information that we are not asking. And so in addition to the trusting relationships, there's also structural pieces that need to be put in place because folks who are navigating these issues know that if certain questions are being asked, that's usually a red flag. And so what we've done as a collaborative or as a group of partners is make sure that we ask and don't ask the right questions.
Right, great. So as we get to the bottom of the hour, I just want to ask one kind of wrap up question. And, because we know that so many places are starting from scratch and really trying to, I'm almost getting tired of saying, right, building the plane as we're flying it. So what is the last message that you would want to leave folks that are attending this webinar to help them as they're trying to accomplish some of the same great work that you're doing? And let's start. Erin, do you want to go first?
Sure, that's a big question, but the thing that first pops in my mind is to just go out and do it and try and be ready to learn from it and adjust as you go, because none of us is going to come up with a perfect program in the time frame that we have here and facing the volume that we need to face. And I know we haven't. We've tried a lot, and some things have worked and some things haven't. And so sometimes it just is do something and then give yourself and your team some grace to keep learning from it and doing better as you go.
Great. Yeah, that's a great message, right? Like, don't expect perfection. Just try and go. James? Oh, James, you're on. Did you double mute yourself? Because you're on mute. There we go. Now you're good. Yep. Oh, but yeah, you must be. Oh, on your phone. Are you muted on your phone? Let's go to. Oh, there you go. There you go. You're good.
Okay. About that, yeah. So I just wanted to add on to what Erin said. For us in particular, also, like she mentioned, we have had to modify our strategies along the way from the beginning of the program to try to more effectively help our tenants out. But I think the final message I want to leave is that it's the most important strategy that we've been kind of fine-tuning the most is our communication with our applicants. So we've tried to go and do things like the outreach to the communities. We've done canvassing. We've done in-person events. And also, we also try really hard to make sure that all of the case managers and volunteers for our organizations that are helping on this program are really, they have really open lines of communication. So that means we have people that are competent in they're able to be competent in working with the vulnerable populations, and they're also culturally aware to know how to interact with them to make them feel comfortable. And we also make sure that we have always someone that will be able to contact them back in a timely manner, so that the applicants always feel like they can trust us and that we are there to help them as much as possible. So I can't emphasize how much them knowing that they can reach out to us for anything they need has really helped us build a good relationship with the community members who have reached out to us for support through the rental assistance program.
Great. Joél, just one quick last word.
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing that I can stress for folks is the importance of awareness of the political landscape that we're all operating within, both maybe at a state level or local level. It's really important to understand who the key players are when it comes to rental assistance. State legislators, for example, are another key group. And so I really encourage folks, to continue to be data-driven, data-informed, research-driven, research-informed, but simultaneously to sort of ask some really thoughtful questions about the political landscape and how it supports the work or hinders the work or creates structural vulnerabilities for the folks that we're trying to serve. So really can't stress that enough. Politics are part of the work that we do, even if they're not in our everyday lives. Great.
And Terry, I'll give you the last word.
Well, the danger is every time somebody went, they took one. So I've had to adjust as we go, because this is the first time in I think our history we've ever all been trying to do roughly the same thing. And ironically, with the same funding source for most of us. So there's a strange communal bond across the country. But I'd say this, in addition to raising up what was just said, there's so many people involved in getting this to happen. And I think in the coming weeks, more and more of the articles are going to be about the money that's not getting out quick enough and how we're not helping enough people. And I think you've got to take a step back every once in a while and realize what we're doing is already epic and historic in the scale of what we're trying to do, and focus on the people we have helped, and we'll get through. I think it's all going to work out if we stay the course, but sometimes we have to push pause and realize this is epic work. Focus on what we're doing and not the negative.
Great, thanks, Terry. Thanks, and thanks to all of you, not only for today, but the great work that you're doing. So I'll pass it back to Sarah.
Great, thank you, Peggy. Thank you, everyone. This was really great. I think I came away with some great insights. I love the last one, Terry, around listening to what's working. I think we tend to highlight what's not working, and maybe we can start to learn from you guys and others around from landlords that are participating, from tenants that are getting access, and really listen to that. I also want to lift up, I think, modifying along the way. I think we've been saying a lot. We've been really transitioning from implementation, but it's time for modifying, course correction, not being afraid to change and pivot as we go. I think that you all talked about your pivots as you went, and that was very helpful. And I think, Peggy, the idea of in-reach and really proactively in reaching to folks and not just waiting for people to come, for landlords or tenants to come and ask for assistance, but really doing that proactive in-reach. We've seen it work in so many programs and in vulnerable communities. And I think this is right up there with a program that could utilize lots of proactive outreach and in-reach. So I just want to say thank you to Barb and Sam and Peggy and Joel and Joél and Aaron and James and Terry for your expertise and your time. We really appreciate everything that you were able to share with us today. As I mentioned before, we will have the recording and the slides all available on our website. And please, if you can, join us next week. Our next webinar is on Accessible, creating flexible, streamlined, and low barrier application processes. And that will be on August 4th from 3 to 4:30. And as you can see, we've got some great speakers lined up. We have Claire Stanley from the National Disability Rights Network, Veronica Soto from San Antonio Neighborhood and Housing Services Department, Gregory Zotnik from St. Mary's Legal Services, and then Erin Barbie from, she's from Dream Key Partners in North Carolina. So please join us for that. And with that, I will say have a great afternoon and evening, and we will see you soon. Thank you, everyone.